Welcome back. My guest is author and journalist Benjamin Pogrund, and he's with me to discuss the life and times of Prof. Robert Sobukwe. We'll be talking about the media. He's an old hand, Benj. He's more than 60 years in the media. We'll be talking to us about that as well. And currently resident in Israel, so he's got a front row seat on the developments there in the Middle East. Now, how do you, when you look at how we treat the story of Robert Sobukwe as South Africans, because we really don't commemorate him much, nor pay that much tribute to him. How do you feel? Does he deserve the respect that he's being denied now, or what's your view?
Well, it's one of the factors here. He's been airbrushed out of history in many ways by the ANC, and one can understand it because he was a political rival. But it does damage to the history of this country and for the young people in this country, because he should be presented as an exemplar, as a shining example of how to behave. Total courage, commitment, giving yourself to your people, honesty, integrity, sincerity. These are the values this country desperately needs. And yet we see, I read stuff, say, about March 21, now Human Rights Day. It's presented as though there was no one else except the ANC involved. It's just a total misinterpretation, mispresentation of history. And this is a great pity, because this is one of the great, great heroes of this country, and there have been many. I mean, I was lucky in my journalistic life to know the most wonderful people. Nelson Mandela was a very good friend of mine. I visited him in prison, which was very unusual. Oliver Tambo, Duma Nokwe, Albert Lutuli. These were great people. And the point, by the way, which I just pops into my head, what I always think about them, and others like Alan Paton and so on, they were great leaders in this country fighting against apartheid. They didn't do it because they wanted a big job, a fancy car, a luxurious life. They did it out of commitment, out of belief in freedom. And that distinguishes them from a lot of what I see today.
But how much access did you have to Robert Sobukwe? And of course, the 18 years that you mentioned, I would like to touch on. We just mentioned the time he spent in prison, but he actually never enjoyed freedom from the time he was arrested, right? When he was released, he was banished, and all sorts of things happened there. When you reflect on them today, you say, how could a person, a human being, subjected to this?
And emerge as strong as he did. Well, when he was in prison in Pretoria, he was moved around, but when he was in Pretoria, I saw him a few times. Then he was transferred to Robben Island, and I was doing research then into African nationalism, I think it was, and I was allowed to see him. I had 6 visits, all-day visits, and we had no illusions. We knew that the reason they let me see him, they want to know how he was thinking. And we were put into a little hut on the jetty at Robben Island and left alone for the day. We were certain the microphone was in the roof above us, and they want to know what he was thinking, how dangerous he was. And he gave them nothing. He made clear in talking to me that the day he was released, he would start again. And as he spoke to me, he knew and I knew he was dooming himself. And in fact, after that, they virtually just locked him up and walked away and didn't bother about it. He just got locked up. They knew they had someone who would never cease to be their enemy.
And of course, when he was banished to Khalishiwe, Kimberley, then he developed lung cancer and was denied
came later. He did law there.
Yeah?
He was 9 years in Kimberley, and then I was visiting him regularly. But on Robben Island, we were writing to each other, and it was a strange correspondence, because I'd write a letter that take 3-4 weeks. If they didn't like something I wrote, they simply wouldn't deliver the letter. There's no censorship, just stop the letter. So I was increasingly looking after his affairs, his clothing, his university studies, his family. And I discovered 3-4 months later that a letter hadn't gone through from him to me or me to him. By the way, Wits University Press has commissioned all his prison letters to me, to his wife Veronica Zodwa, and to the late Nell Marquardt in Cape Town, are being published late this year or early next year. And that'll be quite an extraordinary book also, I think.
Okay, so we'll get to know the psyche of the man and how he viewed the world.
And then when he was in Kimberley,
Yeah.
we'd talk on the phone.
Yeah.
He used to come to Johannesburg. He was allowed to leave Kimberley at midnight on Friday night and be back there by midnight on Saturday night.
Yeah.
So a friend would drive him up. One occasion he was allowed to stay with us and not allowed to go to the townships. They were watching him all the time. And this, Tim, you touch on something very sore, because when he wasn't well, he was coughing a lot, and I said, look, the doctors here are not looking after you. Come to Johannesburg, I'll get the best the late Dr. Boda Koch to examine you. He didn't want to ask the police. He finally agreed. They delayed. I had to go to the minister. There was a delay. We were told we could only go to Boda Koch's rooms in Jeppe Street, as they then were, nowhere else, and then straight to my house. When I picked him up at the airport, the car was following us, so they were watching us. Boda Koch did the examination. He said there was some heart trouble, could be treated. He said he needs an X-ray. We didn't dare walk across the street to get an X-ray done because he was scared they would grab him. It turned out he had lung cancer. The X-rays were done a couple of weeks later, and by then it was too late. That was a terrible story.
Very sad. Dedicated his time, as you say, and committed to his people.
Yeah.
And of course, banished for that long and terrorized, if you will. Well, book is called How Can Men Die Better? Author is Benjamin Pogrund. And of course, there's a new one that is coming to the beginning of the year, you say, next
End
year.
of this year, next year. I'm not
Right.
sure.
Now, when you look at the media with your 60 years experience now, what difference do you see in South Africa?
Wow. Look,
Is it a big question?
I'm talking to an old pro. We drink a bottle of wine, we can have a franker discussion.
Yeah.
But I must say that I'm dismayed when I look at the papers. Journalism, as we know, is not the greatest paying profession.
Yeah.
So a lot of talented people go into commerce and industry and government service, and I think journalism has suffered for this. There's been a whole dilution of standards. You know, when I pick up a paper here, as I did a while ago, and there's a big story across the top of the page about Austria, and the headline refers to Australia. I know there's something wrong there. But on the other hand, there are about half a dozen or more investigative journalists who save this country. They and the judiciary. Those guys, by exposing the Gupta scandals and everything else, have saved South Africa. And that's what journalism has done. So, you know, just look back and just take my hat off to them. But the press as a whole, you can see it, Tim. You read one of the papers here, long articles rambling. It needs editing to get more stories in.
Well, and you should know, I mean, having been an editor for so many years during the Rand Daily Mail days, a newspaper of choice for so many people who sought whatever information they could find on the state of affairs in the country, given that the information was hitting. I have to squeeze in this question, a very brief response from you, and I told you earlier, I'm going to ask this. What's going on in Israel between the Israelis and the Palestinians at this time? From where we're sitting, we just see the Israeli government massacring people there.
Let me say this. I follow South Africa very closely. I read what the ANC, COSATU, the Communist Party, everyone says about my part of the world. And I'm close to things there. I ran a dialogue center in Jerusalem for 12 and a half years to try and bring people together. I know the West Bank. I've been to Gaza. I've got friends across the lines and so on. It's a troubled society, and it's a society in deep conflict, which I don't think we're handling very well. I'm among the many Israelis who are totally against the occupation of the West Bank. There's a very strong segment. But when I read the statements out of here, I feel very depressed, because there's condemnation of Israel, which is fine, but it is based on such misinformation and such obvious ignorance of what is actually going on there. That dismays me. If you're going to take a decision about acting about another country, then at least start off finding out exactly what's going on. You use the word massacre. I don't know exactly what happened on that day when 48, 60 people were shot. I happened to be in the air flying back from Lisbon. Anyway, But the Israeli government, I think, behaved badly then in terms of the media. On our side of the border, they kept the media 2 kilometers away from the border, so reporters had to look through binoculars. But apart from that, the question I'd put to you, if 100,000 people who already say they want to kill you, I mean, that's already there, that's part of what goes on, are going to charge at your border fence, what are you going to do?
Well,
what are you going to do?
as I said, I know that the situation is complicated, is vexed, and it requires a bigger conversation, but I thought as somebody who lives there, let's get at least a response from you. I have to end it right here, I'm afraid, Benji, and obviously the focus was more on the story of Robert Sobukwe. Thank you for paying us a visit in our studios. That's all we have for this evening, and thank you for having been with us on the program, the Modise Network.